Hey, what is up you guys? It is Meyer, and in this video what I want to do is go through making an uplifting trance template here in Studio One. The idea here is to get all the routing done and stuff out of the way so you're not wasting your time doing the same stuff every time. So we'll go through creating all the tracks that you're probably going to need to have and leaving some room to expand. Now I won't be putting any sounds in particular on here because the idea would be that once you actually go in to do the production later, then you'll be choosing your sounds. That way you're not just using the same sounds every time, but hopefully this will be, you can see kind of the way that I would start a track and get this all set up. That way you only have to do this once. Let's go ahead and create a new song, and I'm just going to call this trance template. You know, you can always change these things later, but I'm just going to do it this way. Cool. So now we're placed with this, and there are a few things that I want to do. So first, I'm going to bring up the mixer, and I'm going to close these things. And the first thing that I want to do is go into the settings here and uncheck keep bus channels to the right. And that's how it is by default. In fact, on this computer, it actually remembered that I didn't want to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up what I want to have on my master bus. And there are a couple things that I like to use. So first thing I'm going to do is have a Pro Q3 on here. This is under effects. It's actually, I think it's one of my favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. And the idea behind this is I want to do both a low pass at maybe around 20 hertz or so. Sorry, this is a high pass or a low cut, and also a high cut, 24 dB per octave, which I find to be a good kind of trade-off between not having any weird ringing artifacts, but being steep enough to cut stuff. And I may leave this around 1920K. Obviously, the cutoff point is already going to be cutting half the power, so we don't want to be having that too low. But this is just to take out those really low frequencies that aren't really doing much, and the really high frequencies too. And I actually like bypassing this for the master channel because I know for a fact I am not going to be using it on for most of the time. The next thing I want to do is put on a limiter. And I like using FabFilter Pro L. This is fine. There's this one preset that's really nice, this transparent preset, but I generally don't want to mess with this too much right now. So this is also going to be bypassed for the time being. And last but not least, I like using a spectrum analyzer like Span. Now, obviously, Studio One comes with its own, and the one that it comes with is great too, but I've just used Span for a long time, so it's a free plugin you can download. And I will keep that one on just because that way you can actually see what's going on. So that's usually what I have on the master bus. Sometimes I'll also have Ozone, things like that for doing mastering stuff. And before I forget, there is this included, let me do it this way actually, by type. It's a PreSonus one. There's this like mix tool that I do like having as well. And the reason I like having this is it's very easy to, well, actually, you know what? I don't need this because I can always test it in mono using this kind of thing. But I will have this before the Pro L. That way we can automate the volume of the track as things come along. And usually what I do is I would actually set this up, and I'm not going to do this right now, but set these up with the macros so that there's kind of like, you know, the frequencies of these filters and any of these sorts of things can be controlled directly from the macros, but I'm not actually going to mess with that too much right now. Let's go ahead and start by creating the instruments that we're going to need. And I'm going to actually start with the drums. So I'm going to go ahead and find Impact. And, you know, you can use anything for this, but a couple instruments that we do want to have. So we want to obviously have our kick drum. And I'm going to just give this a nice red color. And I'm going to try to do some of the other percussive sounds as well at this point. So it's going to be the closed hat. We can duplicate track complete, which will actually create a new version of the instrument. We can have an open hat, duplicate track complete. We're going to have a clap here, duplicate track complete. We're going to have room for a ride. And the last thing I'm going to have is just some auxiliary percussion. So this is like an auxiliary percussion track. So with these, of course, we can give them and kind of give them different colors if we want to. It's not that big of a deal, but I like kind of having these percussion things be kind of reddish for whatever reason. Just an interesting habit. Now I'm not going to group the kick drum with all this percussion. But I'm going to select all these. And actually, the before I do that, I want to also create room for some loops. So I'm going to go ahead and find Vice, which I like using Vice as a loop slicer. It's very similar to, oops, haven't activated this yet. This is a new computer, but okay, we get it. Basically, the nice thing about it is you can load a loop, and then it allows you to actually export the loop as a MIDI file, so that way you can go in here and sort of chop it up. So that's kind of why I like using Vice. And I like using this for just percussion. So this is going to be loop 1, and I can just drag in my own loops and things and then chop them up. So I like having some area for that. And I'm going to do this. I'm just going to start with 3 loops, but it's very easy, of course, to go from there. Now I am going to group these tracks in, oops, sorry, not group them. I want to create a bus for them. So I'm going to add bus for selected channels, and this bus is actually going to be the percussion bus. And I kind of like having these off to the side. It's not that big of a deal, to be honest, but having these buses there a little bit off that way. And I'm going to do the same thing with all this percussion, excluding the kick drum. I'm going to add a bus track for these channels, and I'm going to move this over this way. This is going to be this is the percussion. Sorry, this is the percussion bus. And this is the loop bus that I want to have. Now, the next thing I'm going to do here, and you'll see as I do this, I'm actually going to take this loop bus, and you know what? I may try to make these guys like a very distinct color because these are bus channels. This loop bus is what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to route it directly to the percussion bus. That way this channel is both getting what these guys are getting, and it's also getting, all the percussion as well. So this is kind of the percussion and loops bus all together in one. And the last but not least is what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to take all of these and I'm going to pack them into a folder. And this is just going to be the sort of the like percussion. So these are all the tracks inside that percussion kind of area. So that's kind of all nice and neatly packed up for me to just kind of to know for later, I guess. We'll go through what insert effects we want to put on these in a little bit, but for now, I want to just kind of get the tracks routed the way we would want it to. So that might be it in general for most of the sort of the drum tracks that I would have to start with. This pretty much covers it. We have different closed hats, different open hats, claps, rides, etc. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to add an instrument for a sub bass, and I'm going to use Sylenth for this. So I'm going to insert this right underneath the kick drum. And yeah, this is Sylenth. This is going to be the sub bass. And I'm actually going to group this with, well, actually before I do that is what I want to do. So I want to create some mid basses as well. So it's going to be mid bass 1. And I'm actually going to duplicate this several times just so I have 4 mid basses, and I will give each of these kind of their own semi-unique color. And I'm also going to insert an audio track, just a standard audio track, and this should be, yeah, that should be good. Yeah, just for like, this is going to be like mid bass audio, just in case I want to use an audio, any audio for mid basses as well. So these guys, I'm actually going to add a bus for these, and this is going to be the mid bass bus. And this is going to get its own color. So if you notice, all of these guys are routed to the mid bass bus, and then this, along with the kick and sub, are going to be bussed into a kick and bass bus. So I'm going to move this over here. You see why I disabled the thing to be I I guess I should put it this way. This is why I disabled the bus channels staying to the right, because now they're all going to be right here. And I am going to pack a folder for these guys. So I'm going to, these are all the mid basses. So this is going to be mid bass, and give this a very pleasant color for the mid basses. Actually, that might be a little bit too harsh. Cool. So now the mid basses are all grouped together in their way. The percussion is grouped in its way. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is start doing like melodic stuff. So I'm going to do this. This is going to be lead 1 with silent, and I like the leads kind of being this almost pinkish color for whatever reason. So this is lead 1, and we're going to duplicate this. I'm going to start with 3. Chances are I may use 4, I may use 2, it just depends. These guys are going to get bust as well. So I'm going to add a bus for selected channels. This is going to be the lead bus. Once again, it doesn't really matter where they are and stuff, because we'll be dealing with this later. And I'm going to pack these in a folder. I actually may not do that right now, because so what I'm actually going to do is I want to duplicate this, and I want to add the plucks. So this is going to be pluck 1, and I like giving this kind of a similar color, but not too similar. So pluck 2 and pluck 3. So I've got 3 plucks. I'm going to, same thing as before, add them into a bus. This is going to be the pluck bus. Now this doesn't matter a lot, because we can always delete these and stuff as we don't need them. In fact, it's a lot easier to do this and then just duplicate this track complete and do it that way. So it's once again, it does not have that big of a deal. Now, last but not least is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the leads and the plucks, and I am going to add a bus for them. And this is going to be the lead and pluck bus. And that way I can do processing like compression and reverb and stuff on the bus channel of these guys together. So that's kind of why I do it this way, is I both have the leads and plucks individually kind of going to their own channel, processing them as one so that they create one sound, and then they're going to this leads and plucks bus. So in order to achieve that, I'm actually going to pack these all into a folder. These are going to be, I'm just going to do L and P for leads and plucks, and give this a nice color as well. So what I also like doing is I like having another sort of section for pads, and you'll see the way that I do this is I'll pack these into a folder, and then these leads and plucks will be in that same folder as well. So this is just going to be pad 1. I may give this a little bit more of a color like that. And of course, duplicate track. So 3 pads. These guys are going to be, of course, bust into a pads bus. As well. So these guys are kind of going in their own group. I am going to pack these into a folder as well. These are the pads. And at this point, usually is what I would do is I would also add some things like true pianos, so I can have a piano. So this is once again just a piano. It's going to be just kind of going routed directly to the master. Not that important. The other thing I like doing is, if we go back to silent, is adding a sub pad and maybe a sub lead. So this is going to be sub pad, and I will duplicate this and turn this into a sub lead. So now that these guys are here too. Now these of course are routed directly to the master. That's totally okay. And I am going to pack all of these things together into a folder, and this is, I'm just going to call this melodic stuff. And the color here doesn't really matter too much, but the reason I'm doing this is because I like being able to kind of go through and have all this stuff organized, but if I'm working on transitions and stuff, it's out of the way. I'm not having to worry about sort of seeing it clogging up the area that I'm working in. Because as you can see already, we have like 35 tracks and we haven't even really gotten to everything that we want to do. So leads and plugs, pads, all these sorts of things. And then after this, usually it's going to be stuff for effects. So I'm actually going to add this outside of this group, move it out of the folder. So what this kind of area will be is this is sort of like the effects part. So I'm just going to be like sweep 1, duplicate track, so 3 sweeps, and then add track. Actually, duplicate the track, and I'll put a kind of give it this kind of reddish percussion-y color that I like using. Actually, maybe I'll do it more like this. And these are going to be my crashes. So crash 1, duplicate track, crash 1, 2, and 3. Now, depending on how you want to do things, you can either group these together or separately. The other things I do want to add is add a track. This is going to be like some sort of impact. Usually these are like sub drops or things like that. So give that a color out here. So I'm going to pack these into a folder, and this is going to be effects, and give this a nice kind of greenish color. So as you can see, actually I'm going to use a different color for this, and you'll see why in a little bit. So this is the effects. We got our sweeps, crashes. I also like to use a riser, like a synth riser. So I'm going to add this. This is going to be like synth riser. Like so. Now, generally, I don't like bussing these crashes with the effects. So these are going to actually get their own bus. This is just going to be crashes. It's just kind of like that. These guys are going to be bussed to a sweeps. A sweeps bus, I guess, would be the best name for that. And the rest of this stuff can just kind of go directly wherever it needs to. And is what I sometimes do. Sometimes I'll group these together as in some sort of effects bus, but I'm not going to really do that right now because I don't think that's super important. And last but not least, I'm going to have another set of tracks, and these are going to be for fills and rolls. So we're going to go back to impact, and this is going to be the sort of like snare rolls. Give this its own color. Actually, I'm not going to use that color. I'll use something else. Cool. And then I'm going to call up Vice to do, this is going to be sort of like fill 1. Whoops. Cool. And give this a kind of its own color. And I can bust these if I want to, but I may not mess with them too much right now. Usually I would group the fills in some sort of bus. So I would, for instance, add a bus for this channel. And even though I have only one fill right now, there's a good chance later on I would add another. This is going to be like the fills bus. The snare rolls are fine routed to the master directly. That way it's not cluttering up anything. But I am going to pack these into a folder. And this folder is going to be sort of like fills and rolls. Give that a color 2. Last but not least, the thing I want to do is add some sort of section for acids and atmospheres. So those are the remaining kind of sections that I haven't filled in, and those usually come later in sort of making the track. And I like kind of doing them together, although I can of course group them as well if I would like to. So go back to the instruments, and we're going to pull up Sylenth. Now I like using Spire a lot for acids, but for this sake, I'm just going to be using Sylenth for everything because it's low on the CPU and easy to do. So give this a color, acid 1, duplicate it, acid 2, acid 3, pretty simple stuff. Now I'm also going to add, this is going to be like a synth atmosphere. So I'm going to pack these into a folder. It's going to be acids. And then now I'm going to be doing this sort of, these are sort of like the atmospheres. So we're going to have a synth atmosphere, and then I'm going to add a track. This is going to be Atmos 1, Atmos 2, and that's probably all I'm going to do. So I'm going to actually pack this into a folder. Not that big of a deal, whatever it's called, doesn't really matter. Cool, and these atmospheres are packed into a folder. Now, of course, I haven't set up the bus channels yet, so I do want to bus the acids together. Do that. These fills, of course, and these atmospheres as well. I'm going to bus them as to their own bus channel. For the sake of it, this is going to be acid bus, and this is going to be the atmospheres bus. And at this point, I could, for instance, group these guys together. Sometimes I like doing this, so this is like just kind of acids and atmospheres, and then I can see them individually. Not really that super important. Fills and rolls and stuff, risers and sweeps and these sorts of things. And these, of course, it's very easy to add additional ones. So that's pretty much it in terms of the tracks themselves that are being created. So as you can see here, we have about 55 tracks that we're using. The next thing I'm going to do is I want to set up my return tracks. So is what I'm going to do. They're called effects channels. So these are my two sends. And at this point, you know, I can send these to these effects if I want to, and that's kind of how I would do it. So the two effects I like really using are for returns. I like having some sort of big, like some sort of ping pong, I'll just call it delay, and then some sort of like big reverb delay. So for both of these, oops, I've spelled replica wrong. So for the delay send, I'm going to use replica, which is my probably all-time favorite delay of just ever. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the delay channel. And make sure that mixes all the way up because this is a send channel. And for the reverb, I'm just gonna use Arts Acoustic. It's already set up the way that I want it to, and this would just be some enormous reverb like that. Cool, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into these channels and I'm going to kind of set them up the way that I would like to have them with kind of the basic channel settings that I want to have, kind of like what we did on the master. And I want to start by kind of going this way and working my way backwards, and you'll kind of understand why, because some of these earlier channels are actually going to get a little bit more, I guess, complicated as we start adding this stuff. So bear with me here and we'll go ahead and get it all routed up. So the first thing, and this is very, very common, you'll see this pretty much on all the different tracks that I use, is we want to take the EQ, the Pro, it's called, I think, Pro Q or Pro EQ, not to be confused with the FabFilter one, but I like using these in the box ones just because it's a little bit simpler, and put them on these send channels. Now, once again, these are send channels for effects, so I don't want them getting too muddy. So that's why I'm kind of adjusting the high cut in these cases, just so that they kind of get out of the way of the rest of the stuff in the mix. And you'll see this on a lot of different sorts of channels that I have, like what effects am I using and kind of why. This is a good way to kind of see what that would look like. Now, for these atmospheres, I like using these kinds of, I don't know what you'd even call this, these macros, because I have an Atom SQ. So this means I can use 8 knobs and kind of have them, and it'll change depending on what track is selected. And this just makes mixing and stuff a lot easier, in my opinion. So there are a couple ways we can kind of do this. Now, probably the easiest way is going to be to get this. Well, how do I want to say this? So we have the option. We can either use the Pro EQ, or we can use filters and stuff, or some sort of this mix. What is it? There's a name for it. It's the channel strip thing. Yeah, the channel strip, which is really, really useful as well. I tend to really like just using the default, I guess, Pro Q for these kinds of things. So I'm going to set this here, and this is where it makes a lot of sense to me to route this to the sort of low cut, and this to the this for the low cut and this for the high cut. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So the way we do this is we go over here, and I'm going to take knob 1 is going to be low cut frequency, and knob 2 is actually going to be the high cut frequency. And the thing I like about doing it this way is if we go back out of here, you can see that here this kind of gives us a way to sort of very easily adjust the frequencies of the low and high stuff there. And at this point too, it can be really nice to add a mix tool with a gain knob. That way we can automate this. It's a lot better than automating these faders, because these faders, it's very easy to, if you want to change it later, you can't, because you're automating it and you'd have to change all the automation. So that's why I'm a big fan of just automating the gains directly. And once again, I like assigning that to knob 8. Now you can have a system doing it however you want to. This is just kind of the system that I like using. So if we go open up the settings, knob 8, I'm going to use mix tool gain, and I'm actually just going to leave it like this. If you saw my other videos, any of the other places I make templates in, I usually like setting these to be where the maximum is 0, and then I'm only turning it down. And if I need more volume, I have to turn the channel fader up. But in Studio One, the what's the word I'm looking for? It's so good, the snapping, that it'll always snap back to 0 when you want it to, that I don't even mess with it. I think it's perfect the way that it does the snapping, so you don't even have to really mess with it. So these are kind of ways in which you can kind of adjust the low and high cut of these guys as you need to. And sometimes what I do too is I map this button to just bypass that effect completely. And I'm actually going to do that right now. So button 1 is actually going to be mapped to Pro EQ bypass. So if we go back here, to this, you can see this will bypass. This will be EQ off. So sometimes I'll keep that pressed by default. It doesn't make that big of a difference, but you can do that if you want to. But I may just leave it on for now, but just in case you want to do it. Now, the reason I spent all this time doing this is I can actually save this as an effects chain. So I'm going to call this really just EQ plus gain. And just simple Pro EQ and mix tool. And I'm not saving this in a folder because I just want this to be on the top. So now is what happens is if I go over here to my my effects chains, you can see I have this EQ plus gain, and now it's very easy for me to just drag these on the channels that I want them on. And that's kind of why I do it, because if I go over here, you can see that all of my stuff that I've mapped, no matter what, are back. And actually, before I get too far into this, I'm going to use this as low cut frequency. This is going to be high cut frequency, and I generally default these like 18.1 kilohertz and maybe start at 100. That's just going to be my default. So I am actually going to resave this, and this is gain. This is really just volume automation. Just call it volume auto, and I'm going to store this effects. Actually, easier way to do this, replace it. There it goes, and then I can just do this, and if you notice here, now it's kind of overwriting the thing that I had. So we'll do that. Now on these bus channels, I tend to use a little bit of a different philosophy, and the reason for these is on a lot of these bus channels, I like having the control over being able to do any sort of LFO tool, and also I like being able to use filters here. So my process for these buses is a little bit different. So what I like doing is going under the effects, and I like using the filter from kilohertz or kilohertz because it is just the most CPU efficient filter ever. And this is per 2 poles. So this is going to be my low pass filter, and I'm going to duplicate this. Actually, the way to do it, hold down Alt, click and drag, and this is going to be my high pass filter. So go over here, make it a high pass filter, and turn the cutoff all the way down. I also, on the bus channel, sometimes I like to add an LFO tool. That just depends. I'll probably do it for now, but I probably won't mess with it too much. And this depth will be the thing that I'm kind of creating an automation thing for. And the only other thing I want to do is add a channel strip here. So I'll add this as well. So that way I can automate the gain, and I can also do kind of the low cut thing here. Turn the compressor and stuff off. And I actually like this. I don't want that thing there, so I'm going to actually store this as the default preset. Cool. So now that we have this kind of set up, what I am going to do here is I'm going to go back to my knobs and stuff, and we're going to do the same thing that we did before, except I'm going to map the resonances of those filters to these. And this is why I don't use the Pro EQ on these bus channels, because I like also being able to automate the resonance. It just kind of can create a really cool effect to emphasize those filter sweeps that you're trying to do. If we go here in the setting, we're going to actually start with, if you remember before, we started with the low cut. So we're going to do the cutoff here. This is actually going to be the low pass, so this is the high cut cutoff. Now for knob 3, we're actually going to do the resonance for the low cut or the high pass, which is also known as the Q. And same thing here, this is going to be the Q. So I can change the cutoffs here. This is going to be low cut frequency. This is going to be high cut frequency. Now this is going to be low cut resonance, and this is going to be high cut resonance. Now, the only other thing I really want to do here is with these filters, I don't like the fact that the kind of the useful point of where these resonances are is actually at this 0.7. That's like your standard resonance that's not affecting the sound too much. So what I'm going to do with these two is I'm actually going to adjust the sort of the lowest point for the resonance. I don't know why it's doing this. That's odd. But anyway, the lowest point for the resonance, I want it to be about half. Now, unfortunately, I don't think, maybe you can type this in and actually give you the value you want, but I'm not aware of that. So see, that one got it to 0.7, but these guys didn't for some reason. So I don't really know why it's kind of like that, but anyway, probably because I wasn't super precise, and I'm not going to spend the time to be this precise right now because it doesn't really matter. Now this last one, of course, this is going to be the volume automation. So button 8, this is going to be, knob 8 is going to be the channel strip gain. Auto. And what I'm going to do, what I'm going to map to this guy is this is going to be the sort of LFO tool. So I'm going to do two things with this. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to map this to LFO tool, and it's kind of odd what it actually is. It's LFO depth. This is the thing that's controlling the LFO depth for all the parameters there. And I also like mapping button 7 to the LFO tools bypass. So this just allows me to sort of LFO off, turn it off real easily. And this is the LFO tool amount. So once again, very easy for me to turn it on, have it to some value, turn it on. I can automate either of these. Usually I'll automate this throughout the track because it's on the bus, but that just kind of depends on what we're trying to do. Now at this point too, it can also make a lot of sense to put reverb and delay and stuff. I am going to actually save this as store this effects chain. This is going to be low pass, high pass, plus LFO, plus gain. So that's what this one's going to be. And now what I can do is I can add additional stuff to these, and I don't have to worry about, for instance, just, I guess, making it more cluttered than it needs to be. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the trusty Arts Acoustic Reverb. This is under Effects, and it's under my favorites, so we don't really have to mess around with this. So I'm going to put these after the filters. Actually, probably before the filters, now that I think about it, because we want the filters to affect the reverb as well. And this dry signal I actually want at exactly 0. And this wet is going to be the one we're automating all the way up to 0 dB. So that's going to be what I do with that. And I'm also, so yeah, let's go ahead, go back here, and I'm going to map this to the reverb. Go ahead here, knob 6 is going to be Arts Acoustic Reverb, and it's going to be the wet level. And the maximum value that I want here is 0 dB. Now, unfortunately here, this isn't super clear what this corresponds to. So unfortunately, sometimes you have to, that's close enough for me. I can actually go here and get it close, go back in here and say, oh, look, that's 86.6. Of course, then it's, you know, it's relative to whatever this is. I'm not really going to mess with this too much for whatever reason. Oh, that's probably the actual dB values here. So I can, I don't know, set the maximum to be 0. It's not that big of a deal. Just that I have that. And then button 6 is going to turn, is going to bypass this as well. So going back here, this is the reverb amount. Gosh, I really wish this would show the actual dB values, but of course it doesn't. And this is reverb off. Cool. So I am going to store this. This is going to be reverb plus this, plus the low pass, high pass, plus the LFO, plus the gain. And last but not least, I'm going to do one more variant of this where I also add a delay in here. And the reason for this is that way I can automate that as well if I want to with these channels. So this is actually going to be, if I go in here into settings, knob 5 is going to be the replica, the mix amount. So this is going to be delay, dry wet, and button 5 is going to be mapped to delay off. Now, of course, I could also map, and maybe I will do this, button 1 and 2 to filter offs. So button 1 can be, just in case I want to save CPU, I can turn the high pass and I can turn the low pass off as well. I'm going to do that. Okay, so cool. We got that. Going back over here out of this mode, you can see we have the resonances here. We can turn the filters off if we want to. And this is the delay amount. So I may just turn that up a little bit and then just turn it off for the time being because that's the case. And I'm going to save this as a new channel strip. So Star Effects chain, this is going to be delay plus reverb plus the low pass, high pass plus the LFO tool plus the gain. We're going to do that. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to take this standard sort of insert channel that I want to do, and I want to make a variant where I have the LFO tool here as well. So of course, we're going to go ahead and insert this LFO tool here. And if we go back here into settings, we can go to knob 7, inserts LFO tool. This is going to be going to the depth. And like before, button 7 is going to be bypass. So if we go back here, this is amount, LFO tool on, or this is off actually. So this will turn it off. So I can store this effects chain. This is going to be EQ plus LFO plus gain. Cool. So now we have that. So for a lot of these atmospheres and stuff, I would prefer to use that chain actually with the LFO tools on there, but not all of them I like using that with. So you'll kind of see how I kind of use these differently. So I'm actually going to go and replace these with the version with LFO tool on these. The acids is going to be the same thing. I generally like having individual LFO tool control over those acids. And for this bus channel, I'm going to use delay, reverb, and the low pass, high pass, all the kind of regular fun stuff that we were using before here on this bus. For the fill, it's going to be the same thing. We're going to use LFO tool, EQ, and the gain so we can automate it. And then on the fills bus, I'm actually not going to do much with this right now. I'm going to maybe I'll put EQ and a gain on there, but generally at this point, I wouldn't use any LFO tool on this if I'm doing them on the channels individually. It just depends. So here for these snare rolls, I like using I'll just use this reverb, low pass, high pass, LFO tool, and volume automation for doing the snare rolls. Cool. For this impact, there's nothing we really need to have on here other than perhaps low pass. I'm actually not even going to do that. I'm going to remove these, and I'm going to use the channel strip here. And this allows me, I can do a low cut if I need to just take out any of the lows of whatever impact that is. And of course, I could make my own variant of this that has the low cut frequency here with the button to turn it on or off. So that kind of gives me that flexibility as well. And actually, now that I'm kind of thinking about it, it would make more sense for me to take that low cut and put it over here. So yeah, but it doesn't matter. I'm not going to mess with that right now. Synth riser, same kind of idea. That way we can automate the amount. Now, I won't always use these reverbs and delays here on the synth riser channel. And the reason for that is a lot of times I like mapping the reverb amount to whatever synths I'm using pitch wheel, because this riser is going to be rising in pitch. So as I'm automating the pitch, it's kind of increasing the dry wet of the reverb on the synth. And that's something I can't do. I would have to do all these different automation lanes. So that's why I'm not really messing with it too much here. So over here for these crashes, I'm actually not even going to have a gain on there because these are audio tracks. So it's very easy for me to adjust the individual volumes of these of each sample. It doesn't really make sense for me to be automating the volume as the channel's kind of going on. So all I'm going to do here is under default. In fact, I don't like that. Remove all. And just what I want to do is just add go over here. Let's do this as flat. Oh my gosh, it's the PreSonus Pro Q. That's the thing that I'm looking for. Pro EQ. That's good. I'll just do it that way. And well, actually, that is kind of the same as if I go to my FX chains. That's the same as the EQ plus gain preset that I have, where I can kind of do these things. It's just I don't really need the mix tool, so I'm going to delete that. And perfect. That's the way I want to do it. And I'm going to store this as EQ only. So same thing with all these crashes. Now here on the sort of the crashes bus, I'm going to use an LFO tool and a gain on that just for the sake of it. That way I can automate if I want to have any sidechain on these crashes, I can do so. Same thing is going to be on the sweeps bus and in these individual sweeps as well. But once again, I don't need the gain because these are individual samples, and I'd rather just be able to adjust the gain on the master channel if that's what I want to do. Sub lead and sub pad, it's the same idea, although I will keep the gains there. Want to have that LFO tool there just in case, but probably don't really have to be doing much automation on these guys. For the piano, I'm going to use this big guy with the filters and the delay and reverb because the piano will generally have its own delay and reverb. And this channel strip here is very common for these buses. So you'll see pretty much any of these buses where I may want to be filtering things in and out, I'll be using them here and there. Now, of course, on these leads and plus buses, sometimes I'll use a separate filter for these guys in addition to the overall leads and plus bus, but I'm not going to do that too much right now. I'm going to use EQ and gain on these guys and on the individual channels as well for that matter, and in addition to these pads. So once again, I like really processing these in general as a bus altogether. Now this gives me the ability to automate the volume of the individual channels as they're playing. So I may not have a use for this volume automation right here. Do that. Cool. Same thing for these loops, gives me the ability to filter them in and out. And of course, on the bus channel, we're going to use one of these that has the LFO tool on there as well. Same thing with the percussion bus channel. And usually for these guys, I'm not usually too worried about fading them in and out. I do like the ability to use an LFO tool on the clap. That way I can, if it's hitting with the kick, it can get a little bit too much. So I will have that there. For the rest of these, it's just going to be EQ and gain, even though I very rarely touch the gain on these guys. Usually once they're in, you know, but might as well have it kind of pre-routed and ready to go. And same thing for the mid bass. For the mid basses, I do like having individual control over the LFO tools of them. So that's why I'm going to use this for all of these mid basses, the same kind of low pass, high pass, plus the EQ. And for this mid bass bus, I'm going to use this delay reverb, the one that has the delay and the reverb in there. Now, I don't always use these, so it's good that they're off by default. Now we come to the kick and the bass, which are generally going to have different processing, because this is kind of where the kick being pretty much the most important thing, and your sub bass maybe being your perhaps second most important element in your track. So at this point, this is where we need to be very particular about what we're going to be doing on these channels. Now we have a couple options here. So for the kick, obviously we want to have an EQ of gain. In fact, I'm going to use this entire channel strip. In fact, I should just replace the whole thing. Now there are a lot of things in here we don't need. For instance, we don't need the reverb or the delay. We won't need the LFO tool because I'll be using something else for that. And this is generally going to be the same. So this is just basically the low pass, high pass, plus the gain. But it's not the low pass and high pass. That's just kind of standard. This one is the one that has that LFO tool as well. I am going to keep the LFO tool on the sub bass. And I generally like having this be a pattern where the first two beats are cut off. So whatever the sub's doing, this is my default. If you're doing an offbeat or 2 16th notes, you can do it that way, and that's kind of how it is by default. I'm going to have that turned on. I don't want it bypassed. Thank you. Cool. And I generally don't need a low pass filter on this either, so that's going to go away. I will use the EQ. So if we go back to the effects under PreSonus, and what I should be doing, or what I should do at this point, is favorite this, because I do like using EQ a lot. And whoops. And this is sort of the standard EQ for the sub bass. And we probably don't need it to be taking up that much information there. And once again for the kick, same idea, maybe cut it off around 30. And this one I generally won't use a high cut for, because the kick's going to be, you notice how all these other channels are cut, and that really helps the kick cut through the mix, because it's the only one that has that really extra high frequency information that no one can probably hear anyway. So just kind of how it works. Last but not least, I am going to take R bass. I usually like my subs in mono, so I'm just going to take R bass in mono, and I'm going to put it here right after the EQ. Take this down all the way. So this just gives me the ability to kind of take the R bass amount and mess with it, and I can even map this to one of these guys if I want to do so. Not really going to do too much with that right now, but have the low cut frequency. This would be a good place to do like R bass amount. Do that. So that would be knob 5, inserts, R bass mono. This is going to be the intensity. I think I can do this also as the frequency. Now I would never automate these over the track, but of course that is kind of useful to be able to do it. And last but not least, I'm going to map button 5 to the R bass bypass. That way I can just kind of turn it on and off. So going back here, this is going to be R bass amount. It's going to be R bass frequency. This is going to be R bass off. Cool. So it can turn LFO tool on and off, do the volume automation, low cut, resonance, frequencies, all that good stuff. And for this, generally I won't be touching this, I won't be automating it, so there's no reason to do it. So on this kick and bass bus, the only thing I'm going to put here for now, and you'll see kind of where I'm going with this, is going to be the, where is it? The EQ. And I'm going to leave this off, just completely off. But this is if I need to do any boosting or any cutting of the two together as a bus channel, in addition to the mid basses being there. This gives me the option to do that. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this plugin. It's called the Megascope, and it's from this Ozillos, this Ben Schultz company. And this is really cool because if I put it, for instance, on the kick bus, what this will do here is this will show like what the kick is doing. And then if I put another one of these on the sub bass, you'll see it'll actually, this is the sub bass. You can actually see where the kick is hitting. So this is the kick. Here's the sub bass. You can see this is a tempo synced. It's like the oscilloscope in LFO tool. And I can put this on a bunch of channels. So I can also put this on this is the kick and bass. Maybe make this like white or something. And last but not least, I'll put one on the mid bass bus. So this is the mid bass basses. So if the sub bass is generally a darker blue color, then the mid basses are generally kind of a lighter blue, and I can rearrange these. So this just lets me see, okay, what's the kick and bass doing? What's the kick doing? What's the sub doing? Are they overlapping? Are they causing any peaks? Just helps me be really, really precise with that. Now, of course, you want to be mixing with your ears and not your eyes, but this is kind of a good way to sort of have that all set up in a way where you can be setting yourself up for success. Maybe I'll put it that way. So if you notice here, my CPU meter is at 20%. Now this is misleading because this shows the maximum CPU performance, or I guess the CPU load on a single core. So my machine, this is an old machine. It has, I said it was a new computer earlier, but it's like an old new computer. I redid the operating system and stuff. So this isn't really like the beast of a machine anymore, but it's 4 cores, 8 threads. So even at 20%, I still have a lot of room to do multi-threading and stuff. And of course, if CPU becomes an issue, very easy to be freezing tracks and things like that. I may actually folder these, pack folder. This is going to be kick and bass. And just give this a very simple color. So this has all that stuff in there, percussion, things like that. Now, the last thing I want to do here before I get too involved is I want to set up a few automation things and also some marker stuff. So I can actually, I may have to open this. There it goes. I can open the marker track. So usually song starts, pretty simple. Bar 33 is going to be when the sub bass comes in. So I do want to add a marker here. Do this. This is going to be sub in. Usually that's kind of when that is. And this just gives me a way to sort of spell out where the song's going to be. So I'm not doing anything super complicated here. This is going to be breakdown. I'm just setting these markers up, and then I'll obviously move them around later. It's going to be build up. Let's say 16 bars later, we are going to do the drop. I like doing 32 bars for drop, so this is going to be over here. This is going to be the outro, and maybe 32 bars later. So you can do the math here. This would be 185. That's the song end. Cool. So now you can see all the sections and stuff. It probably does let me change the colors, but I'm not gonna mess with that too much right now. Cool. And last but not least, sometimes what I like doing is I like adding a track, just adding a stereo track. I should just do it this way. And this is just going to be sort of like a reference track. And I would like to have this docked all the way to the left along with the sends, but no such luck here. So that's just going to stay over there. Usually there's some way I can, under settings, keep effects channels to the right. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, that'll do. So this is pretty much it. The last thing, and this is one of the cool things about Studio One that you can do, is you can actually set up what automation you want to use ahead of time. And this is really useful for any of the stuff that I know ahead of time I want to be automating. When I open these folders, I kind of have access to them. So I can hit A to go into automation mode, and I can kind of go here and I can say, okay, well, what are the things that I'm most likely going to want to automate on this kick drum channel? And obviously the volume. So I can, this is the gain. Would want to have some of that. Maybe the low cut. So this, edit automation for this, boom. High cut, edit automation. Just kind of starting it off the way that I would want to do it. And a lot of times the low cut resonance I also do. The high cut resonance I don't always do. So now that I have all these, I actually can go right click on this, and there's an option to do it. Expand envelopes. So this is going to take all the automation and it's going to sort of explode them down here. So now is what I can do. I can do low pass cutoff. This is the low pass resonance. Now for whatever reason, and I don't know why, it didn't remember the fact that this, that's odd. It can actually go below the point that you'd want this knob to go, but not that big of a deal. Gives me the option to do that. And once again, just kind of a good practice to kind of have these things there. So now I can kind of select the colors that I want to use for these different envelopes, and that way I can be consistent. So this is actually the low cut frequency, and this is the high cut frequency. So I like blue being bass, so the blue is going to be my low cut frequency. The high cut frequency I'm going to make red because that's the high frequency stuff, and then the high pass the low pass this is actually the high cut resonance is going to be that color. So that's once again the kind of the options I have when I go to automation mode. I already have these envelopes there, and they're kind of grouped with the kick. So this just kind of gives me an option to just know what's happening ahead of time, and knowing what I want to automate makes things really easy. So we can do the same thing with the sub bass. What parameters do I really want to automate here? So I can open this sub bass up, and I can go ahead, and I should just keep this open. So the sub bass, generally the only thing I'm really going to automate is the volume. That's pretty much it. So edit the automation, and it doesn't really matter. I can expand the envelope if I want to, but that's fine, I guess. The gain, which is directly the volume automation, and that allows me to control the volume throughout the track. Cool. Moving on to the mid bass bus. Generally is what I like to do here is I like to set up automation for the mid basses. So what I will do here is I will go to the mid basses, and generally I like being able to automate the LFO tool amount, although I'm not going to do that really right now. The big ones here for the mid bass, this should be on the mid bass bus. For whatever reason, it's not. Low cut frequency, high cut frequency, resonance, all these guys. So edit automation. And I just like adding these points just so that it knows that I'm going to want to expand these envelopes later on. There, and last but not least, the volume of the mid basses are something I will likely want to change. So if I go ahead and go into this section, I can expand the envelopes, and this should really be here in the mid bass bus. So I'm gonna have these in here. So this is the low cut mid bass, low cut frequency, mid bass, high cut frequency. But once again, we want to do these colors right. So this is low cut is or actually the low cut is going to be, how did I do this before? Oh yeah, blue, sorry. High cut frequency is going to be red. I believe, now I'm actually thankful that I did this. So this is the low cut resonance. Give this kind of a weird green color, and this is the mid bass high cut resonance. This is going to be mid bass volume. Cool. Once again, it's very easy for me to go back here and add a add whatever I need to add if I need to do any sort of automation on any of these other things, but this just gives me the option to have it all set from the start. The last thing I do want to do is I like kind of setting these by default to control the MIDI CC1. So this is going to be basically the mod wheel. So I can go under MIDI and modulation wheel. It doesn't really matter, but that's kind of the way that I like doing it. So MIDI 1 modulation, and the mod wheel color on this doesn't really matter too much. Maybe I will just make it pink. So I can always set these to the same thing. So the cool thing too, I can even give this a color. I mean, I know ahead of time this is just the modulation wheel, so not that exciting or anything like that. MIDI, modulation, and last but not least, MIDI, modulation. Don't like that it always defaults to that color, but what can I say? So that's pretty much the mid basses all set up. I do have control over the modulation envelopes if I want to do any crazy automation with them, and also have control over all of these other parameters and values that I would want to have throughout the track. So once again, pretty cool. Nice. Okay, so let's move on. So we can go ahead and collapse this group. And notice how these things get collapsed when I turn the automation lane off, and that's why it's helpful to have these folders. So percussion is going to be very, very minimal. I am going to take on the percussion bus, I know ahead of time. Where'd it go? Percussion bus is over here. Should be over here. Open this up. Now the issue that I'm realizing now is that I actually want the low pass, high pass filter here. So I'm going to replace this with what I had before. Just kind of, so that way I have control of the filters and the resonances. Now the only thing I generally do is high pass cutoff and resonance. So edit automation. This is going to be, this is actually, I should say this is low cut frequency. This is high cut frequency. This is low cut resonance, and this is cut resonance. Cool. So have it like this, and of course we can go back here and edit the automation here. Now this is the high cut, so it's going to be red, and this is the high cut resonance, which of course I also use. This is going to be orange, and of course the volume as well. Edit the volume automation, and it's easy to go ahead and expand the envelopes so that I can see them when I enter automation mode. Percussion bus should be grouped with the percussion, and this means I can also adjust the volume here even if this mixer tab is closed. Just kind of helps with these kinds of things. With the rest of these guys, probably wouldn't mess around with them too much. The only thing maybe I would use is if I look here, is just kind of the really is what it would be here, and it's very easy for me to do this, is just the volume automation. So going in here, edit automation, gain, edit automation, gain. Just that way, you know, if there's going to be something I'm going to edit, it's most likely going to be that. Gain. Gain. Pretty simple. The loops bus stuff I'm probably going to leave alone. Maybe the only thing I would do is edit this automation, but I'm not even going to really mess too much with like where this is and stuff, because there's a very small chance I would actually automate this. Maybe I would, and sometimes I do, but this is the high cut frequency that I would be using. So once again, I'm just going to keep it like that. And this loops bus needs to be moved over here for whatever reason. Misbehaving. Oh, I see. Okay, the reason it was getting moved around and stuff is because I was moving it here and it was reflecting here. Interesting. Okay, cool. So that's pretty much it with the percussion. The loops I'm not even going to mess with. So going into melodic stuff, the leads and plucks. If we go in here, leads and plucks bus, this is where the majority of the automation is going to happen. So most likely I will be automating the volume of this, automating the LFO tool amount, which that's like the perfect color for me. LFO tool amount, that's fine. And maybe I would automate the high cut and stuff, but not going to mess with that too much right now. So this is the leads and plucks bus. Now these individual buses, I'm actually not even going to mess with at all unless I really need to do any automation on them. And just like before with these leads and plucks, what I want to do on this is go under MIDI and select the modulation wheel for all of them, because that's going to be the thing I need to do. Now, of course, there's a much easier way to do this, and that is by removing these tracks and instruments and just simply taking this lead and duplicating it several times, and oh, easy. Same thing with these plucks. Move tracks and instruments. Going to take this, add MIDI modulation, that pink color that I like, and for the mod wheel, and of course duplicate this twice as well, just so that we have it ready to go. And of course, to view it, we just have to set the display to be the modulation wheel. Notice that doing this automation didn't really do anything to the CPU meter. Cool, so we got our plucks bus. The pads bus, the next thing I'm going to do here is I want to go ahead and do a little bit of automation. Now the pads, I generally tend to do a lot of automation, so I like automating the volume, LFO tool amount, the high cut frequency, and the high cut resonance. So go ahead and expand these envelopes and put these in the pads folder, like so. And I actually want to move these in front of all of them, just where it was. Sweeps can stay where they were. So gain is fine, LFO tool is fine. I'm gonna make that green. This is actually the low pass cutoff. This is the high cut frequency, and this is the cut resonance. I'm gonna make this orange. Cool. So this is pretty much the stuff we need for this pads bus. And of course, once again, I should mention, by doing this, it's very easy for me to record the automation once it's already set up this way. So I can either record it or pencil it in. High cut, yeah, gain, LFO depth, high cut resonance, things like that. Last but not least, I want to go in here and I want to display the modulation wheel as pink. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to remove these tracks and instruments, and I'm going to do what I did before. Pad, duplicate track, and duplicate track, so that the pads there are ready to go, and it's very easy for me to see what the automation is doing. Pianos, I'm not going to touch. The sub pad, maybe I would automate the volume if I can think of it, but I'm actually not even going to mess with that right now. So what I could do, actually, easier way is doing this and just take this. Actually, I'm going to turn the EQ off on this for now, and volume automation, edit the automation, but I'm not going to expand it to its own lane. Same thing with the sub lead. If I was going to use it, chances are I would be automating the volume, but there's a good chance I won't touch that at all. Cool. That's there. The effects bus, I'm really not going to mess with at all because these guys, I generally don't even tend to automate anything. Usually I'll use clip fades and stuff, so I'm not even going to touch this right now. Sometimes it could be helpful to take that effects bus or whatever I'm using, except I'm not even using an effects bus, take the sweeps bus and do some sort of processing on it. And sometimes I would actually bust the sweeps and the crashes and all this stuff, but I'm not going to mess with that right now. Fills and rolls, same thing, doesn't really matter. I could have some sort of volume automation, but not going to mess with it. So once again, going to the acids and atmospheres, the acids, all I'm going to do, I'm going to take this and somehow this acid bus, because I'm not looking at the right bus, that's why. Take the high cut, edit the automation, take the high cut resonance, edit the automation. And I don't know if I'm going to even mess with the volume. I can do that on a clip level. Okay, cool. So this is the high cut frequency and this is the high cut resonance. So you can see this is the acids bus, so it belongs under here. Somehow it's not behaving. There it is. Cool. And once again with these acids, these are the ones that we make heavy use of the modulation wheel for. I generally like mapping filter cutoff to these mod wheels and kind of going from there, but your mileage may vary. It really just doesn't matter as long as it works for you. That's just kind of the way that I work. So remove the tracks and instruments and duplicate. Oh, did not mean to do that. Duplicate track and duplicate it one more time. Not that big of a deal. And last but not least for this atmospheres bus, I generally like to do automation. Once again, high cut automation and high cut resonance automation, and that's going to be pretty much all that I use for this. This atmospheres bus is going to go inside here. It could be high cut frequency and cut resonance. Cool. So high cut frequency, once again, I like making this red, and the resonance for the high cut is going to be there. Cool, so that's pretty much how it is. This thing is pretty much all bussed up, and when I'm doing most of the production work, I don't even really need to even have the mixer open, and that means I can focus a lot on sort of adding MIDI, things like that, and just kind of moving these parts around and doing what I want to do with that. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and in another video, maybe I'll actually make a track with this template so you can see how easy it is once all the routing and stuff is already set up. So thanks for watching. Hope you guys learned something. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe.